Sarah, before we started today,
Okay.
you touched upon a really important topic that's very close to my heart and for a lot of people in Pakistan. You mentioned Aafia Siddiqui, and I think you have some, like, you do not know about that case. Is there anything you can shed light upon with that?
Yeah, I've personally been involved, called for the freedom, the resistance, the dropping of charges, the repatriation of Aafia Siddiqui. You know, it seems impossible how long this has gone on. The imprisonment, the torture, the prison conditions where she's held are absolutely horrendous. This is a federal prison for women, and it really is a hellhole. It is supposedly a medical center, but people are in Carswell in Texas, just outside of Dallas, Texas. She had absolutely no visitation rights for years. I mean, was held in solitary confinement, then allowed into general population where she was attacked. Now, that was arranged, I really do think. Back into solitary, terrible, really terrible conditions. And this is a brilliant young woman who, both in Pakistan and here, at the very, very top of her class, very top student, very top at MIT in the U.S. and fervent.
Yeah.
Now, she was rounded up at a time when people were being.
Can you say a bit about her background? How the story, where it starts? Do you know?
Well, she and her family, who are quite each of them maybe scholars in their own right, and scientists and doctors, right? And she was particularly brilliant and came to the U.S. after being the top scorer in Pakistan. Here, she was active in cases support for prisoners and against war, but nothing that. But it was a time when the U.S. was looking for spectacular cases.
In today's episode of Afghanistan, I get to speak with Sara Flounders. Sara is a veteran anti-war activist, an author, and co-director of International Action Center. Sara is known for her advocacy of global justice and anti-imperialist issues. I hope you enjoy this episode. Please do not forget to like and share, and also subscribe to our channel. It helps us more than you can think. Thank you, and now let's get started. Hi Sara, how are you? Thank you for joining us today.
Oh, good to be here talking with you.
Thank you. I'm really honored and grateful for you taking the time out for this. Also, Sara, I had a bunch of questions ready for you. However, yesterday I was speaking with David Swanson, anti-war activist, and he actually, I learned a lot from that. Previous to this, I didn't know much about the anti-war movement, other than obviously from time to time what we see, different protests in different parts of the world. So I think I have learned a bit, and I'd love to kind of maybe take some of those things further to discuss with you. Like one of the things that I was talking to David in straight out of the gate, I think I was wrong, and he put me straight. I was talking about the movement, anti-war movement, to stop the Iraq war, and I was saying that was like not much came out of it. And David was saying that's not right. I mean, we couldn't stop the war, but it's wrong to say that not much came out of it. And in reality, it was a huge public relations disaster for the people involved in the war. Do you agree?
Yeah, very much so. I think for the first time, the whole world saw a sharp break and difference between the U.S. government, U.S. political parties, and the millions and millions of working people here who know that these wars are not in their interests. What also came out of it was, for years, a strong movement against U.S. sanctions, because the sanctions on Iraq killed far more people and were enforced for years, decades, by their own measure. 500,000 children died in the first 4 years of the U.S. sanctions back in the 1990s. And so I was part of a group that continued that campaign. But the U.S. invasion in 2003, there was again a big upsurge of a political movement here, absolutely opposed to the own government and its policies that come from both political parties. You know, there are many people who always have this expectation that appealing to this politician or that, rather than building on their own strength. And the grassroots movement they think that will bring more results. And it turns out they're bitterly disappointed each time. So, and I think it also did show that we can see this in Palestine today, there's no limits to the level of destruction and directly targeting of civilian populations. At the same time, with every war comes a criminalization of a whole people. So there was an all-out attack on the Muslim population in the US in terms of the simplest forms of travel, shopping, schools, and then denial of legal citizenship, even right of entry into the US. So with war, they are able to instigate it by appealing to and whipping up a very reactionary current that become the enforcers of the war on a local level. And so they have to really be combated pretty militantly here. Anti-war forces find that they're taking on the war domestically too. They're taking on the war in, police attacks on demonstrations. And this has reached a whole new level also in Palestine, where here you see every student organization in the US shut down. The Students for Justice in Palestine organizations banned from campuses, their social media sites, student scholarships cut, professors summarily fired, no excuse given. If they're sympathetic to Palestine, they don't teach again. So these things are really horrendously repressive, and yet they don't shut down the movement. So I think we can see also the limits of what US power, they think they're all powerful. And that's certainly the assumption today. It's certainly the assumption of the Zionists that they're all powerful, and then they find they're up against a people's resistance. So people learn from that here also. They're inspired by that. And we have a new movement today, but there was a real heritage from the anti-war movement too.
Thank you for that. Because as you were talking, especially about what's happening in Palestine, and I was thinking, it's so awful and disheartening to see what's happening in broad daylight in front of cameras. Scenes that will never be forgotten. They'll never be wiped away. This is going to be our history that our future generations will look back and discuss and think, what was everyone doing? So it's really disheartening, and depressing. And I was thinking, how can someone opposed to war continue their efforts in this vein? But I think it's really right how you've summed up everything at the end of your statement, saying that what the work that you guys are doing is having a true impact, and also despite all of their efforts, they're not able to shut you down. That's amazing, actually. And also, I haven't thought about this before, but you guys in the USA, you do have extra responsibility, extra burden on your shoulders, because you're kind of directly under the influence and under the writ of these people.
We certainly are, and all too much. Yeah, we are. And so it becomes essential for people here to separate themselves from the government rather than appeals to the government, to denounce their crimes. I do think also, as discouraging, as horrific as it is, and the images are every single day, there's no way of measuring it. At the same time, the whole world is learning a new level of resistance and the capacity to resist, even when it seems impossible. I thought after the first weeks it would be impossible. And yet Gaza has shown a human capacity to continue to totally resist. And it's inspired a whole region of West Asia. When you look at Lebanon, Yemen, Iraq now, Syria, throughout. It's changing the political climate, and it impacts the political climate here in the U.S. There's an assumption that folks will just go along with it, and instead they're taking a very different measure, particularly for the youth who haven't lived through a U.S. supported war in the past. And this is a U.S. war, as much as it's being fought by Israeli troops, every ounce of it, every weapon, the billions and billions of dollars that keep it going, it's stolen right from programs here.
So today is Friday, November 1st. Next week we've got elections in the USA. By the time this episode gets published, the elections would have been over and done with. But I do have questions relating to, like, with the elections, how do you see the elections? How do you see the current system in the USA, the two-party, which is kind of what we're dealing with here in the UK as well? It's impossible to break out of it. But at the same time, do you have other candidates that you're supporting at the moment, or are you disengaged? How are you dealing with the elections?
Well, the elections in the U.S. are structured strictly for two imperialist parties. There is no one else who has the funding, the access. I mean, I'm talking about billions of dollars. It's inconceivable. And you can say anything. There's no longer even fact checking. And I'm giving you my opinion and the opinion of many others, that there is no way forward with either political party. We're at a real, what they call lose-lose situation, regardless of who is elected. There's determination to continue the war on Palestine, and to also whip it up on other wars. NATO war, Russia, encircle China, on to the next war. I mean, really, the whole program of both Democrats and Republicans, it's not even discussed, because here's the one thing they can agree on. They each have a different social base. And of course, Trump has a completely racist, right-wing, horrific base. But Kamala Harris refuses to put up any opposition to anything he says. With every campaign talk, again, endorse the Israeli genocide. I mean, there's no other way to look at it. She won't separate herself from it by 1 inch. Nor will she even make any of the promises that Democrats used to make. They didn't carry them out, but they would promise better health care, and they would cut student debt and money for housing and all kinds of things. That's not even on the agenda. And it can't be on the agenda, because to pay for more and more war, which is the greatest profit for U.S. corporations, and that is the direction they go. Where is there the greatest profit in a system that is dying? And so this is end stage of empire. I don't know any other way to put it, but where they want to threaten the world, and they're not making any promises even to the population here. And so we need to find ways out of that. and place more reliance on working people, on the demonstrations, on the protests, on the union drives, on things like that, where you can force change through from the grassroots. But the idea of going into either political party, now there's several small third parties. Those are protest votes, and that's fine for anyone who wants to do that, or stay home. I mean, really, sometimes they don't even count the protest votes for months. They're considered so irrelevant, which is offensive in its own right. So,
yeah, it seems like there seems like no way out of this whole situation. Viewing things from outside, I saw there was like a lot of, at least on the media that we see outside here, social media, there was a lot of support for JFK Jr. And then when things got clearer, it was clear that he had, for Israel and Palestine, I don't think he had any different solutions at all. He was the same as what everyone else was talking about.
yeah, that was a shock, because there were folks who were all excited, about that run, and it turned out he was even a more fanatic Zionist, and people stepped back in horror, because no one thought to look at that. It seemed like he was, against NATO expansion for a hot minute there, but it turned out that was just,
So this is the thing. Regardless of who you vote for, you get people under
you
the
get war.
Zionist lobby, and it's the same here in the UK. So we've got the Conservatives, the Labour Party. The Conservative Party was in power for over a decade, a lot of wars, and at the end, when they left, they left behind the legacy of the Ukraine war, what's going on in Israel, and then Labour Party comes along, and nothing's changed. It seems like it's just a change of guard, and no policy has changed as far as foreign policy is concerned.
Exactly. Actually, in the Labour Party, what they did was clean house of anyone who had the slightest sympathy for Palestine or opposition to the war. They just ripped them, literally expelled them from the party, and then they had a very safe institution again.
Are you aware with what happened with Jeremy Corbyn here in the Labour Party?
A little bit. That's an example. Yeah.
I mean, there's lots of policies that I would disagree with, that he backed. But when it comes to him being an utter gentleman, and also a man of principles, ideology, conviction, whereas the politicians that we have, 1 minute to the next, they're doing U-turns because they hold nothing sacred other than money, war, and expansions, imperialism. And it's just a shame to see what they did with Jeremy Corbyn. We don't have that many politicians of that caliber left, of that integrity, and it's just a shame to see what's happened.
Well, it's exactly why they wanted him out, because the British Empire knows who defends empire, and they are determined to be in. They may be going down, and they've hitched themselves to U.S. empire completely, and to war, and in the most bigoted and racist sense, also. So anyone who even seems that they could speak out of turn is disposed of.
Yeah, we came out of Europe with Brexit saying that we want more opportunities to deal directly with countries like China and India and all of these countries. And we come out of Europe and then we start threatening China and all of these other countries that we wanted to presumably do deals with.
Well, I really think, the U.S. Is determined to both block with the UK and also with the EU, but saw them as competitors. And the best way to bring them down, break them up. And so, once Britain broke out, they actually had less leeway. I think, I don't know enough of British politics, I have to say, but looking at it from here, there are real options. We could see that at the BRICS meeting, countries can trade with each other and for their own benefit. I mean, this is and the exchanges, and that rather than war, this holds hope throughout Africa that has been totally colonized, Asia. Look at Latin America. The whole idea of just trading without being completely strangled. More than 40 countries in the world today are sanctioned by the US, also enforced by the EU and UK. A third of the world population, is sanctioned. And instead, all of the study is on how to make the sanctions more sophisticated. That means more deadly towards civilians. How can they, by cutting off medicine, yes, of course, but also fertilizer and grain and ability to purify water and the most basic things. It's about recolonizing the globe. And Britain is all for that. That's how that little island gained its wealth, by looting. And that's how the US gained its position. And they are for looting the world and trying to destroy the opportunities for development. So, but I think there are other things now that will impact the US economy. It's no longer the dominant economy in the world. And, that's a big threat to them. It's a big threat.
Yeah. Thank you for mentioning sanctions. It's exactly what I was thinking of before we started this episode. Even thinking about my talk yesterday with David, we talked a lot about wars, which are really important to talk about, but we didn't touch upon sanctions. And these things can be more devastating than wars because in some ways, they're longer lasting. And it's awful to see how the grip that the West has had and how they've abused it into getting. And now it's quite comical how they're trying to put similar sanctions on Russia, which in fact are sanctions upon themselves, saying that we don't want cheaper oil anymore from Russia, so we're going to get oil that goes from Russia to India, and then we'll buy it more expensively. And it's sanctions on themselves now.
Well, the sanctions really did boomerang. Biden first announced these sanctions on Russia. He announced there would be regime change. He said Russia will collapse within weeks. They won't be able to sustain this. And that's not what happened, because the whole rest of the world that really does need the grain, fertilizer, gas, and oil, they weren't going along with some legislation passed by I like the term, the G7, the Genocide 7. They weren't going to go along with the Genocide 7. No, they will make every effort to continue to trade, make every effort. We have a campaign here for a few years now called Sanctions Kill. We have a website, sanctionskill.org. We've published books, petitions, demonstrations, webinars, really explaining the impact of sanctions on a whole number of countries, listing the countries, showing the pieces of US legislation that enforce this, and how sinister it is. Because even more so than any war, those who die are children, seniors and elderly, anyone who's health compromised, and the poorest, who have, less flexibility. If there's hyperinflation, well, then there's families who don't eat. And if it's really creating artificial famines in countries that were well able to feed their own population and suddenly find that they can't. So I think a lot of countries refuse to go along with the sanctions on Russia for their own basic self-interest. And also China has given them a leeway. Here's another powerful economy interested in buying oil and gas. The same thing for India. Other countries said, well, we're going to continue to trade. Now, then there are all sorts of secondary sanctions the U.S. threatens with. Now, who did it benefit? It really hurt Europe, and it really hurt Britain, where they say the challenge is between heating and eating. How terrible is that? But it was of benefit to U.S. corporations, who are now the largest oil and gas exporter because of fracked gas. So it's in their interests to block the Nord Stream. It's in their interest to block oil and gas from Russia and to try to break up trade. I think this is something now even Saudi Arabia has realized. They suddenly realize somehow they're a competitor to the U.S. They better be careful and have other options. And so there's been a kind of a reconciliation, or at least in a normalization. I don't know, maybe reconciliation isn't the word, but between Saudi Arabia and Iran.
Yes,
the U.S. used to say, "Oh, we'll take all of Saudi Arabia's money and give you weapons. Let's keep a war going." And now they're realizing might not be in their immediate interests.
Yes. Let me just take a moment's break to introduce our sponsors for today. This episode is proudly being sponsored by the Worldwide Listings Company Limited, or WLC for short. WLC is a e-commerce marketing agency specializing in making brands successful on Amazon. So if you are thinking of starting a new venture, or if you already have a brand and you want to take it to that next level, then get in touch and WLC will be able to help. For transparency purposes, let me also tell you that WLC is actually a company that I founded and am the director of. When you get in touch with WLC, you'll be getting in touch with me and my team, and we look forward to greeting you and seeing how we can help. Thank you, and now let's get back to the episode. The thing I find most bizarre in everything that's going on is the attitude of Germany, both in terms of what's happening in Ukraine. Basically, they're supporting USA at the expense of their own citizens, at the expense of their own future, their industries that are packing up, actually moving to America. And how, what kind of leadership have they got where they can actually see their country, their economy collapsing like this for no reason? And they've allowed it to happen. And then the second thing is how a country that has the disgrace of genocide that they've been kind of trying to brush aside, and now they're in a situation where they're actually supporting another genocide happening in the Middle East. It just makes no sense what's happening in Germany.
Well, it makes a certain sense. Germany had for decades a certain level of economic independence and built a certain thriving economy and industry. But look at the sheer number of US bases in Germany. You can't be very independent when you're hosting that many bases and troops. And the political system in Germany is pretty much under US thumb. Any politician who's going to make it in Germany goes through a whole vetting process with the US. And that means on any big issue, they can count on those votes. And it's the same thing with Japan. If you have 80 US bases sitting in your country, you can act like you're independent, but you're not going to be very independent to pursue policies in the interests of your own population. You'll end up having to bend your knee, pursue the policies that benefit the US. And you could certainly see that in the way in which sanctions and the expansion of NATO. Who pays for all these weapons for NATO? When you join NATO, a country has to refurbish, update all their weapons by buying US weapons. That's a huge subsidy to US military corporations. They love NATO. because not only US weapons, but the whole world then has to, if they sign on, purchase those weapons. And that works the same thing in Asia. Oh, let's have a new military alliance. Everybody, should buy those US weapons.
That's the thing, because they were trying to make an alliance against China with India, Japan, Australia. Now with BRICS coming in, things don't look how simple they did for US not too long ago. But also how, yes, absolutely, what you mentioned about things improving between Saudi Arabia and Iran. And it's amazing. I mean, that's something that was helped along by China. And in all the times, if we look back, I don't know, all the way back to World War I can't think of a time where the West actually brought two countries closer together. And here we've got like Iran, Saudi Arabia, the relations between Iran and Egypt are improving.
Yeah.
The relations between Turkey and Syria are hopefully improving. And those are things that are being encouraged by Russia and China so that we can kind of have a more peaceful regional environment where countries can do trade.
That's exactly, it's sort of an amazing thing, because these governments, there's no interference into the ideology, the politics, or any effort to, you have to follow our way. It's simply to say, let's normalize relations. But that is a threat to the US, who has based their power on always how to stir the pot, divide and rule. That is British policy.
They've learned it from the British, exactly.
Throughout, right, the whole Indian subcontinent. They were masters at it, of studying every group, every nationality, but to turn it against another. Every religion. They really developed anthropology into a very sinister science, and as did the US toward the indigenous people here. Divide and conquer, divide and rule. It's an old Roman Empire concept, but so a group of countries, and this is very true for China, true for Russia, are saying, well, maybe there's another way to normalize relations, not to make demands on each other. The whole concept of win-win. Let's look at 10 things we each want. Is there something there that you want that we also do? That's a win-win. With the US, it's always a lose-lose. What are you going to give up? And we're putting down the orders. I mean, the way in which even US ambassadors function in other countries is pretty insulting. And so it becomes, it's almost a revolutionary thing. It's kind of amazing just to say, let's normalize relations. Let's trade with each other. Let's have development plans. Here we've reached a level of science and technology where there's more than enough to feed the whole planet. And yet, here's hunger. There are more people who die of hunger than die in wars. Die of hunger, and yet it's artificial famines that are created. So we need a new way, and that way is happening. And it's a big shock, I think, for the US government, because suddenly they're so used to calling the shots. In their arrogance, they really haven't evaluated what's happening, I think.
It's actually happening so fast. It is amazing. Right. It's a bit breathtaking. I mean, they were trying to use India as a bulwark against China, and now we've got a situation where China and India are able to normalize their relationship despite any border tensions. Another thing, Sarah, I was also just touching upon some of the things that you talked about previously about how US thought is going to be easy. They can have victory over Russia. The ruble's going to be rebel or whatever it was. And right. And this propaganda is quite dangerous, I find, that have propaganda, that's fine. But to believe your own propaganda and then to make policies based on that propaganda is, and for a country, for a bloc of nations that are so militarily strong, to have those miscalculations where they thought Russia is going to be a walkover, where Israel thought that they have eliminated Hezbollah's top leadership. So now Hezbollah is a weakened force, and now we can walk into Lebanon. And then to have policies based on that, and to have propaganda that Iran is a weak country, and we need to sort out the problems with Iran now while we have time. And then the propaganda hits reality, and things aren't the same. So it's very, very scary how they're falling for their own propaganda.
They absolutely believe their own propaganda. That is true. There is an arrogance, an imperial arrogance, that they can't see the world as it's developing, and they're used to looking down on the people of the world and just assuming they can call the shots. So they can't seem to readjust to a new reality. They're no longer the biggest economic power. Countries have other options. Now, you would think just those figures would cause a reevaluation, but it's not. This is a system that is driven to maximize profit, and the biggest source of profit is the military corporations. So they go toward war again and again, and toward enlarging the military budget. They say, oh my God, the economy, it's failing. More money to the military. So it is that irrational. I wish I could say that there's a reasonable argument that we could make to these policymakers, but it's big lobbies that decide. AIPAC, yes, but AIPAC survives because it's in the interests of the military corporations, and so it's they want that message out there, and so they allow it. If there was a lobby calling for disbanding all of this, well, they'd be jailed right away. It's not an acceptable message. So I think these are, but arrogance won't stop what's happening. What's happening is pretty inevitable. There's new technology. The whole idea also, the imperial powers, they had a lock on technology, and they could deprive other countries of that technology. Now it's like the technology broke out. And so India is a good example of this. China is certainly an incredible example of this. Countries are able to both solve their immediate problems and help other countries solve their problems. And that's a lot of what's happening. When you look at the Belt and Road programs, why is that so interesting to other countries? Well, at just a fraction of the interest, and at much more beneficial loans than they could ever get from the IMF or the World Bank, they can develop really needed things, whether it's a railroad or a port or development of an industry, a refinery. These things change the whole world, and it changes the standing of all different countries. They have new markets too. If the only market was in the West, then you distort everything to fit that. I think a lot of countries are finding there's other possibilities now, and that works against U.S. arrogance. It won't be an easy process, though.
Yes, because
for the population here or around the world, because they go to war. They want repression. They look at the big demonstrations here, and what do they say? Oh, we need more police. They don't say, let's sit down and listen to these students who are putting everything on the line. They say, let's figure out how to get rid of all these students, expel them.
these students who are protesting in USA, they are heroes. I mean, I can't imagine them when they have their whole lives in front of them. They have bright futures in front of them, and they're willing to sacrifice that for the right cause for humanity. It is amazing.
It really is. But they're at a time in their life when they also know they can make choices. And so they're making real choices because they are seeing, you know, populations making great sacrifices. Now, that is deeply inspiring. I can't underestimate how, you know, and to see young people make changes even in their understanding of the world from a year ago to now. You know, when you think of a year ago, people would just say ceasefire, let's just stop it. Now they really are putting out more and more statements that are with the resistance, even though that's completely illegal. And that's true not only in the United States, it's true throughout Europe, where there are all kinds of bans in place. And somehow folks are you know, walking right over that.
Yes, it's
That's
inspiring. It does show that we have hope for the future, and things will improve, as we say.
I'm very hopeful. I truly, but of course, I'm interacting with a lot of folks who are, you know, they're determined, they're forceful, they're finding new ways, and even, you know, a year ago, if someone lost, oh my goodness, they lost their social media, they would just be. Now they sit down and create something new. You know?
Sarah, before we started today,
Okay.
you touched upon a really important topic that's very close to my heart and for a lot of people in Pakistan. You mentioned Aafia Siddiqui, and I think you have some, like, you do not know about that case. Is there anything you can shed light upon with that?
Yeah, I've personally been involved, called for the freedom, the resistance, the dropping of charges, the repatriation of Aafia Siddiqui. You know, it seems impossible how long this has gone on. The imprisonment, the torture, the prison conditions where she's held are absolutely horrendous. This is a federal prison for women, and it really is a hellhole. It is supposedly a medical center, but people
Where is
are
she held?
in Carswell in Texas, just outside of Dallas, Texas. Uh, she had absolutely no visitation rights for years. I mean, was held in solitary confinement, then allowed into general population where she was attacked. Now, that was arranged, I really do think. Um, Back into solitary, terrible, really terrible conditions. And this is a brilliant, who was a brilliant young woman who, both in Pakistan and here, at the very, very top of her class, very top student, very top at MIT in the U.S. and fervent. Now, she was rounded up at a time when
Can you
people were
say a bit
being.
about her background, how the story, where it starts? Do you know?
Well, she and her family, who are quite, each of them maybe scholars in their own right, and
Yeah, very,
scientists
very
and
educated
doctors,
family.
right?
Yeah.
Um, and she was particularly brilliant, and came to the U.S. after being the top scorer in Pakistan. Uh, Here, she was active in cases support for prisoners and against war, but nothing that. But it was a time when the U.S. was looking for spectacular cases, and I think she was just. Well, some think she was just sold by the Pakistani government that they needed. But at any rate, she ended up, you know, a secret prisoner at Bagram. And then the claim was she shot a U.S. soldier after
Tragically.
she had been taken captive, which is so preposterous. no one was injured except her, and she almost died. But even though no one was injured, even though she was a Pakistani citizen, even though this happened in Afghanistan, she was brought to New York City for trial. I mean, that in itself is completely illegal. Courts here are for crimes committed in the US. But it was a media sideshow. There were literally hundreds of police of every, you know, imaginable against one woman who they considered this great threat. So that's how I became involved. When she was brought to New York City, we set up small picket lines, just solidarity, because there were so many people at that time who were being picked up, disappeared, outrageously charged, some held in solitary, some never heard from again. I'm talking about, the quote, war on terror. And but I think they needed someone pretty spectacular, so everything was dumped on her. And so at any rate, we tried to speak up at that time, but the trial, she was sentenced for in a case where no one was injured but her. No one even had a scratch. Nevertheless, 86 years. And that's when she was sent to Carswell. And it's been a horror since then. So, there is a new effort for her repatriation, her return to Pakistan, to her family.
Where is that taking place? Like in like government corridors or on the streets, or what's?
Well, in the U.S. courts, there's all different appeal processes that can be made. And, here we have, when you consider Guantanamo, which 4 presidents have promised to close, and yet there are people still there. But there is some effort to end those cases. And I think there are people that are now hopeful that perhaps also in Aafia's case. Now, I don't know. I don't have much confidence in U.S. courts or U.S. prisons to show humanity, but I do think that always it's important for pressure, and it's important for the prisoners themselves to at least have visitation, to know that others care. She was finally able to visit with her sister. Things like that are painstaking and yet very important. Very important. So at any rate, we're hopeful, but we also do feel that this is she is a victim of the U.S. war on terror, unjustly charged, and she should be returned to her family.
Thank you for that. It's first of all, as a someone from a Pakistani background, I think it's shameful and embarrassing how little interest Pakistani government, successive governments, even Imran Khan, who populist leader and talked a lot about Aafia Siddiqui, no one's done anything. And secondly, is Aafia's family is such a, as you said, highly educated. And I've seen some of their interviews, and I just can't imagine her father's passed away, knowing how his daughter is in prison and being tortured. And somehow he was still always hopeful, always polite, always humble. So it is a sad, sad tragedy. And thank you for that. Thank you also for all the work that you've done in this. And let's hope with all the efforts from you, from so many other people, that justice will, at the end, will prevail, and she will come back home. Thank you.
Well, even in the here and now, keeping petitions, this is what can keep prisoners at least alive. So the efforts are important.
Thank you so much, Sara. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you today. Before we go, and because I know you're tight on time as well, before you go, would you like to tell us a little bit about some of the work that you do, but also publications, websites, any social media links, and we can definitely put a link in the notes as well.
Okay. I'm a contributing editor to Workers' World newspaper, and that's available at workers.org. Just a very simple, workers.org. I'm co-director at the International Action Center, and that site is IACENTER. That's the US spelling, IACenter.org. And we also have an important campaign called Sanctions Kill.org, which has released books and petitions and reports and statements showing what a pervasive crime this is and what its impact is on civilians. So that's been the focus. And of course, this entire year, since October 7th, everything has focused on solidarity with Palestine. I have traveled to Palestine, both West Bank and Gaza in the past, and you could see the injustice that exists even before, that exists every day, every minute. The whole population's carved up, walls built. You can't go from one block to another. And been to Lebanon after the Israeli bombardment in 2006, when Beirut, Dahiyeh was leveled, and to Syria, where a third of the population was made refugees. The U.S. was all for that war. So these countries, it's important, the solidarity with them, and it's important to try to explain to people here the impact, and to do so in videos, to do so in statements. Of course, there are many who are far more skilled at social media now, and we're just barely, carving a little bit of a way with YouTube channels, but also Instagram and TikTok. That's kind of beyond me, but the younger activists, they know how to do it, and also they get shut down and they just set up a new site and they're off and running. So I do think there's a great deal of potential for grassroots activism, for new generations learning how to resist U.S. imperial power, and also feeling and knowing that they're one with the world, not with a tiny elite group here that exists for maximizing profit. Let's maximize human relations. That's get us much further.
Thank you so much. It is really important to highlight these tragedies, individual tragedies. Just in the Middle East, there's just so much devastation, from Yemen to Gaza, West Bank, as you mentioned, Syria, Lebanon, lovely country, lovely people, historic places, and so hospitable and so kind. I've been there myself, and so many places I never had to get a hotel. People just opened their homes and allowed you to come and stay with them, and you learn from them. Yeah, my heart hurts when I see all of that, what's going on. But thank you so much. I think it's really important for them to see what you're right, to see that they have support, not just from within the Middle East, but from the wider world.
That's right, and that there are millions of people in the U.S. who are at least in sympathy and looking for ways to express that. That's a change that didn't exist before. So let's be hopeful and continue to be active.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So much,
Thank you very much.
Today.
I value this.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.